There's always that one friend. You know, the type, the woman who's just a little too close to your husband. She laughs at all his jokes like he's the funniest man alive, touches his arm or shoulder when there's no reason to, leans in so close it feels unnecessary. To anyone else, it looks playful, harmless, maybe even sweet. But if you've ever been in my shoes, you know it's never just one thing. It's the build-up, the dozens of little things that pile up, drip by drip, until you can't ignore them anymore. For me, that friend had a name, Sarah. When I first met her, I honestly wanted to like her. I tried. She wasn't just a stranger orbiting my husband. She was part of his large, tight-knit circle of 11 friends, people who'd known each other for years before I even entered the picture. And to her credit, she was never outwardly hostile. She smiled, she asked questions about my job, she complimented my outfits now and then. On the surface, everything between us looked perfectly fine. Anyone looking in from the outside would have said, "Look, they get along great." But there were layers most people didn't. See, undertones, and those undertones mattered. Sarah had a way of inserting herself into spaces that weren't hers. She carried this constant need to prove that she knew my husband better than I did. She'd drop little comments in casual conversation, like, "Oh, he's always done that since college," or "He still remembers that thing I taught him years ago." She'd laugh as if it were all innocent. But there was nothing innocent in the way she said it. It felt deliberate, a reminder that she was there before me, that she still had a claim. And then there were the physical cues, the way she'd lean in close, her hand resting on his shoulder a moment too long, the way she'd slide into the seat beside him if there was even half a space available. None of it was blatant enough to call out directly, but it was constant, and it wore on me. If it had just been once, maybe twice, I could have brushed it off. Truly, I could have. But it wasn't just once. It was a string of things, building slowly, drop after drop, until the glass overflowed. The hardest part was trying to explain it without sounding unhinged. Because how do you accuse someone of laughing too much, of sitting too close? To anyone else, it sounds trivial, like jealousy or insecurity. And I'll admit I worried about that. I didn't want to be the cliché, the insecure wife, the jealous partner who couldn't handle her husband having female friends. That wasn't me. At least, I didn't think it was. So I did the only reasonable thing. I talked to my husband. More than once, I told him about Sarah, about how she made me feel, about the touches, the way she inserted herself, the constant little reminders that she knew his history better than I did. I never accused him of anything, because I didn't believe he was doing anything wrong. But I needed him to understand the view from where I was standing. To his credit, he didn't dismiss me. He didn't roll his eyes or laugh it off. He listened, he nodded. Sometimes he even admitted he could see what I was saying. But even then, I could feel this quiet resistance in him, a subtle disbelief. To him, Sarah was just Sarah, harmless, a friend who had been around long before me. She wasn't a threat, not in his eyes, and maybe, just maybe, I wanted to believe that too, so I pushed it down. I told myself I was overthinking, that Sarah wasn't worth the energy I was giving her. I focused on us, on our relationship, on our plans for the future. And then came the wedding. From the very beginning, my husband and I had agreed we would elope. No massive guest list, no complicated seating charts, no bridesmaids or groomsmen, no drunken toasts from people we barely knew. Just us, our parents, a simple, intimate ceremony that was completely ours. It was perfect. It was quiet. It was everything we wanted. There were no pastel dresses lined up at the altar, no matching suits, no blaring DJ or crowded reception. Just love, vows, rings, and the kind of sacred joy that only comes from knowing this moment belongs to you and no one else. Of course, that meant none of his friends, including Sarah, knew until afterward. No one was excluded out of spite. We simply wanted the day to belong to us. We hadn't even gotten the professional photos back yet, so we hadn't shared much online. It was still our little secret, our private treasure, and I loved it that way. But for Sarah, that decision was a spark to dry kindling. The undertones that had simmered for months suddenly burst into flame. The subtle digs turned into sharper words, accusations spoken out loud. And for the first time, she stopped pretending to be just the friendly presence in the background. She stepped out loud, emotional, impossible to ignore. And that was when everything shifted. That was the moment Sarah stopped being just that one friend and became something else entirely. The storm had broken, and I had no idea how much bigger it was about to get. The night everything shifted started out so ordinary. It was one of those long-awaited evenings where my husband's group of friends was finally getting together again. For months, we'd all been locked down, cautious, waiting for life to feel safe again. Now that everyone was boosted and comfortable meeting in person, one of them hosted a small get-together at their house. Nothing fancy, just drinks, food, music, and laughter filling up the rooms. I went into the night thinking it would be light-hearted, a celebration of sorts. After all, this was the first time most of them were seeing us since our wedding. We had eloped just a few weeks earlier, and while not everyone knew all the details, word had spread. I figured there would be hugs, congratulations, maybe some light teasing about running off and tying the knot without a big party. And at first, that's exactly what it was. People cheered when we walked in. There were smiles, claps on the back, and glasses raised in toasts. Someone shouted, "Finally." Another joked, "About time you two made it official." It felt warm, like we were being wrapped in a blanket of love and acceptance. But then Sarah came into the picture. I spotted her across the room almost immediately. She had that look on her face, the one I'd come to recognize. A mix of excitement and intensity, like she had been waiting for this moment and wasn't going to let it pass quietly. She made a beeline for us. And while everyone else was laughing, smiling, congratulating, Sarah's energy was different. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She didn't even really acknowledge me. Instead, she went straight to my husband, planted herself in front of him, and launched into this emotional speech about how disappointed she was. Her words cut through the laughter in the room like glass shattering on tile. "I can't believe you didn't tell me," she said, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "I can't believe you didn't invite me. You didn't even send me a picture. Not even a text." The room went quiet. Conversations around us dimmed. Suddenly, all eyes were on Sarah, my husband, and me. My husband tried to keep his voice calm, steady. He explained again, in front of everyone, that nobody knew, that not even our closest friends had been invited, that it wasn't about excluding her or anyone, it was about wanting a private moment just for ourselves. He said we didn't even have the professional photos back yet, but Sarah wasn't hearing it. Her eyes welled up with tears, and within seconds, she was crying. Not sniffling quietly in the corner, no. Full and sobbing, right there in the middle of the living room. "How could you do this to me?" She cried, I thought I was your best friend. I thought we had something special. I always imagined you'd be my man of honor when I get married. And you didn't even think to include me in yours." Her words weren't just emotional, they were dramatic. They weren't about celebrating us. They were about mourning what she thought she had lost. And she made sure the entire group of friends knew just how betrayed she felt. I stood there, frozen for a moment, watching this unfold, my chest tightening with every sentence she threw out. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months started to boil. I could feel it rise up, hot and heavy, as I listened to her claim ownership over a moment that was never hers to begin with. And here's the thing, I could have stayed quiet. I could have stepped back, let my husband handle it, let him try to comfort her or explain again. That's what some of the people there probably expected me to do. But I couldn't, not this time. Not when she was sobbing about our wedding like she was the one who had been left at the altar. So I snapped. I turned to her, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it come out before. And I said, "He might be your best friend, but you're not his. This wasn't about you. This was about me and him. And you weren't even a consideration." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. There was this collective gasp, followed by a chorus of low, awkward ohs from the crowd. The kind people make when they know they've just witnessed a fight spill out into the open. Sarah's face crumpled. Her tears turned from hurt to humiliation. Without another word, she spun on her heel and walked out of the house, her sobs trailing behind her as the door shut. And then came the silence, a silence so heavy, it pressed against my skin. Half the room looked at me with wide eyes, stunned that I had said what I said. The other half looked at my husband, as if waiting for him to fix it. A few exchanged glances with each other, silently debating whose side they were on. Because here's the truth, this wasn't just between me and Sarah anymore. This was a spectacle, a public crack splitting open in a tightly woven friend group. And the fallout wasn't going to be simple. Later that night, when we got home, my husband and I talked about it. He told me he understood why I snapped. He admitted Sarah had crossed a line, that her outburst was inappropriate, especially in front of everyone. But at the same time, he said he wished I had let him handle it. That by stepping in, by saying what I said, I had made things harder, not just for Sarah, but for him and for the group dynamic as a whole. And maybe he was right. Maybe I should have kept my cool. Maybe I should have let him deal with it, let him set the boundaries with her. But standing there in that living room, listening to her cry about my wedding, about my marriage, like she had been robbed of something that belonged to her. In that moment, silence wasn't an option, so I asked myself, did I go too far? Or was it about time someone finally told Sarah the truth she'd been avoiding for years? Because after that night, nothing in that friend group was ever the same again. The next morning, the air in our house felt so heavy I could almost hear it pressing against my chest. My husband sat at the kitchen table, his coffee long gone cold, staring into the cup as if the dark surface might offer him an answer. I made myself a cup of tea, pretending everything was normal, though my stomach was twisted into knots. We sat in silence, just the clink of my spoon against porcelain, the low hum of the fridge. I could feel words hovering between us, sharp and unsaid. He wanted to speak, and so did I, but neither of us wanted to be the first to break. My anger from the night before still burned beneath my skin strangely, laced with relief while he seemed crushed under the weight of it all. Finally, he spoke. "You weren't wrong last night," he said quietly. "Sarah crossed a line, but the way you called her out, in front of everyone. It felt like you were declaring war. A bitter laugh escaped me. She hijacked our wedding moment, turned it into her little betrayal drama. I've bitten my tongue long enough. Last night I couldn't anymore. He rubbed his forehead, letting out a long breath. I know. I do. But now the group's split. I've already gotten messages. Some think you went too far. Others say Sarah did. And I'm stuck in the middle. The words stung, though I had braced myself for them. I didn't want him caught between loyalties. But I also knew that if I hadn't spoken up, Sarah would have kept pushing, kept disrespecting me. Later that day, my phone lit up with messages. Last night was wild. Honestly, Sarah was out of line. You were right, but calling her out in front of everyone. Brutal, a drama blows over. A few weeks, people will forget. Every text carried its own verdict, its own spin. Some defended me. Others hinted I should have swallowed my pride. And Sarah, nothing. No message, no apology, not even a token olive branch. Her silence said more than words ever could. A week later, my husband insisted we go out with the group again. We can't avoid them forever, he said. The moment we walked in, I felt it the shift. Some smiled politely, others avoided my eyes. One guy skipped me entirely, fist-bumping my husband before moving on. It didn't take long for the tension to crack. Look, Matt said, leaning forward with his beer, what happened the other night? That should have stayed between you two. Bringing it to the table made everything awkward. Before I could answer, one of the women cut in. Oh, come on. Sarah was the one being ridiculous. It was their wedding, not hers. She acted like she was the one left at the altar. The table split instantly. Voices rose, hands gestured wildly. What should have been a casual night out twisted into a courtroom, and I was on trial, and my husband. He sat silent, eyes fixed on his glass, drinking like it might swallow him whole. I know he hates conflict, hates watching his chosen family fracture, but his silence cut deeper than anyone's words. I felt like an outsider, branded as the one who disrupted their little ecosystem. In their eyes, I wasn't a wife defending her marriage, was the villain who'd tipped their balance that night. At home, I asked him straight, "So, do you think I was wrong?" His eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "No, but I'm tired. Tired of how the group feels like a minefield now. Tired because you and Sarah, there's no space where you can both exist without this tension." His honesty was a quiet blade. I knew he loved me, but I could feel how deeply those friendships weighed on him. Days passed. Sarah stayed silent, but whispers reached me she felt betrayed, humiliated, not ready to face me. The irony made me laugh bitterly. She had hijacked my wedding moment, and somehow she was the victim. Meanwhile, I noticed my husband still texted her. Less than before, but enough to remind me she hadn't vanished. He wasn't cheating, I knew that. But every time her name flashed on his screen, his face tightened. He didn't want me to notice, didn't want me to know how tangled this had become. One evening, I sat alone in the dim glow of a lamp, staring at the quiet pool of light on the carpet. That's when it hit me. This wasn't over. Sarah's silence wasn't retreated, was strategy. She'd be back. And when she came, I'd have to choose again, step back for peace, or stand my ground and risk being painted as the villain all over. Deep down, I already knew the truth. This was only the beginning. Sarah's silence had been like the calm before a storm. and I knew better than to think she would just disappear. She wasn't the type to give up easily. Deep down, I knew this confrontation was inevitably it, was only a matter of time. One late evening, as I was finishing up the dishes after dinner, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel, my heart skipping a beat, and opened the door. There she was. Sarah stood there, wearing a simple dress that didn't try to impress, nothing flashy or dramatic. But her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and her hands were nervously clasped together in front of her. For a brief second, my chest sank. There was something about the way she looked vulnerable, yet calculating, that made my stomach twist. But almost immediately, I squared my shoulders and braced myself. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to sound composed and sincere. I opened my mouth to refuse, to tell her this wasn't the time or the place. But just then, my husband appeared in the living room. He froze for a second when he saw her, his eyes wide with surprise and something like concern. In that instant, I realized the delicate balance of the evening had shifted. Control was no longer entirely in my hands. We all sat down in the living room. Sarah faced me, her shoulders slightly hunched, like a child about to be scolded. I crossed my arms, trying to project calm and authority, though my heart raced. My husband positioned himself between us, neither fully on my side nor hers, caught in a way that made the tension in the room almost physical. I'm sorry about the other night," Sarah began, her voice soft, tinged with guilt. "I got too emotional, and I guess I let it control me. I didn't mean to ruin your moment, your wedding celebration." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You didn't mean to. Sarah, you practically hijacked my wedding, turning it into your own personal drama in front of everyone. Don't try to tell me that was unintentional." She lowered her gaze, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "I know, and I'm not expecting forgiveness right away. I wanted him," she looked at my husband, voice catching slightly, "to know that my friendship with him still matters, that I never wanted my mistake to hurt anyone or break the group apart." I turned to my husband, who remained silent, his eyes silently asking me to show some leniency, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But I knew this wasn't just about friendship, and it wasn't about me being cold or controlling. It was about our marriage, about my place in his life, and most importantly, it was about setting boundaries that had been ignored for far too long. "Sarah," I said, my voice firm, calm but unwavering, "friendship is fine, but boundaries need to be respected. You are not his priority anymore, and I will not allow anyone to make me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. Not now, not ever." The room seemed to freeze. Sarah didn't speak for several long moments. My husband looked like a man caught between two powerful forces, between loyalty to a long-term friendship and the new life we were building together. Finally, Sarah stood up. "I'll try to do better," she said quietly. "But I hope you understand I and him. We've shared so many years, so many moments. Completely cutting off contact isn't possible. I can't erase our history." I didn't respond. I simply stood, opened the door, and let her leave. Her small figure slowly faded into the dim glow of the streetlights outside. The door clicked shut, but my heart didn't settle. I turned to my husband and asked, quietly but directly, "Do you trust her?" He paused for a long moment before speaking. "I believe she wants to make it right. I really do, but I also know this will never truly end unless one of us lets go." I nodded slowly, though inside I felt the turmoil roiling. I'm not the type to let go easily. And I knew Sarah wasn't either. That night, I lay awake, staring at the moonlight streaming through our window, realizing something important. Peace was only temporary. Sarah may have taken a step back, but that didn't mean she would disappear from our lives. She was still out there, waiting, planning, and watching. A chill ran down my spine as I imagined the inevitability of her return. When it happened, she would come back more determined, sharper, more relentless than before. And deep down, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. This battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It had only just begun. In the days following the tense encounter with Sarah, the atmosphere in our home felt like a taut string stretched to its limit. Life went on, we still ate together, went to work, talked, but there was an invisible, suffocating weight between us, the kind that made every small interaction feel precarious. The house that had once felt familiar and comforting now seemed like a testing ground for patience and emotional endurance. My husband began to avoid mentioning the friend group entirely. He texted less, participated in fewer group chats, and gradually even declined invitations. Yet every time his phone buzzed, my heart jumped. One day, I noticed him texting Sarah when he thought I wasn't looking. The fleeting worry in his eyes, like he was afraid I'd see was impossible to miss. I didn't say a word. I just exhaled quietly, realizing that this was far from a simple situation. One weekend evening, he suggested we attend a gathering with the group, framing it as a chance to keep the peace at first. I refused, still raw from the last encounter. But he pleaded, just one time. We can sit in a corner, don't have to talk much. Let everyone see we're okay. I reluctantly agreed, cautious and tense. At the familiar cafe where the group met, I noticed immediately how much had changed. Glances, smiles, handshakes all were measured, precise, lacking the warmth of old familiarity. Sarah arrived last, carrying a milk tea, her posture slightly hunched, her eyes flicking to my husband with a mixture of tenderness and calculation. She didn't look at me, didn't speak to me directly, but her presence was a sharp reminder. I was the outsider. She conversed with the group, with him, yet carefully maintained distance from me. Every gesture, every glance, carried a subtle assertion of influence that kept me on edge throughout the evening. My husband noticed my tension, but he only squeezed my hand under the table, silently reassuring me. Relax, I'm here. I won't let her upset you. I nodded, but the feeling of isolation lingered. Sarah didn't need words to assert herself. Just by existing in the space, she could manipulate the room's energy, including my emotions. Throughout the night, conversations about work, travel, and parties flowed around us. But I could feel the hidden layers, the testing of boundaries. Each question, each joke seemed designed to gauge my reaction. I smiled politely, the effort nearly exhausting me. I realized it wasn't just Sarai, was being tested by the entire group, including my husband, to see how far I would tolerate this intrusion into my marriage. Later, at home, we sat across from each other on the sofa. I asked bluntly, do you think she actually wants to make amends, or is this just a power play? He paused, thoughtful, eyes distant. I think it's both. She genuinely wants to repair her friendship with me, but she also wants to see how you react. She's not entirely bad, but she's extremely cunning. I nodded, a heavy weight settling in my chest. I understood now that it wasn't only Sarah who was challenging me, it was the group dynamics as a whole, and the way my husband's history with them created unseen pressure. They were testing my patience, my tolerance, my willingness to assert myself. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring out the window, questioning whether I could maintain enough calm to avoid losing control. Could my husband and I truly stand together against the combined pressure of Sarah and the group? I drew a deep breath, grounding myself. I had to be strong not just for him, but for myself. No one, no matter how long they'd been friends with him, had the right to make me feel diminished or inferior in my own marriage. And I knew, with chilling clarity, that this was only the beginning. Sarah had not vanished. She was still out there, observing, waiting, calculating. The next confrontation would come, and when it did, she would return with sharper strategies, more determination, and a resolve that could challenge anyone. I understood one thing. The battle ahead would be subtle, drawn out, and exhausting. It wouldn't be about loud arguments or dramatic gestures. It would be psychological, emotional, and persistent. And my husband and I would need every ounce of composure, strategy, and mutual trust to navigate it, sitting there in the quiet glow of the living room light. I felt the truth settle in. Our marriage, just beginning, was already under siege not by enemies we could see, but by those we had once trusted and the unseen dynamics they carried. Sarah remained a shadow over our lives, and I had to prepare, mentally and emotionally, for everything she might throw at us. This wasn't a chapter that would end soon. This was the real beginning of the battle. The following week, the tension at home didn't let up. It felt like we were walking on a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap at any moment. Life went on as usual. We ate together, went to work, talked, but there was an invisible weight between us, heavy and suffocating, that made every small interaction feel delicate, almost dangerous. The house that had once felt familiar and safe now felt like a pressure cooker for patience and emotional endurance. Sarah wasn't gone. I knew that. She had only stepped back temporarily to observe, to plan her next move. I could feel it, a subtle, constant awareness that she was out there, waiting for the right moment. One Friday evening, my husband suggested we join the friend group at Matt's house, one of their longtime friends. He framed it as keeping the peace, trying to prevent any new tension from rising. I hesitated. I didn't want more stress, more games, more subtle manipulations, but I eventually agreed, telling myself I would stay quiet, watch, and not let myself be pulled into anything. The moment I stepped into the living room, I felt it immediately. The energy had changed. Every glance, every smile, every handshake was measured, precise. Sarah arrived last. She walked in with a milk tea in hand, her posture slightly hunched, a faint, almost fragile smile on her face, but her eyes locked on my husband with an intensity that made my chest tighten. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about presence. It was about control. She was reminding me, silently, "You're not part of this." Throughout the evening, she recounted stories with the group, retelling memories she shared with my husband, making sure I was aware of them, yet never meeting my eyes. Every joke, every laugh, every casual gesture felt like a test, a way to measure my reactions. I smiled politely, trying to stay calm, but inside it was a war zone. Sarah didn't need words to assert herself. Just existing in the space, she exerted a subtle, psychological influence over everyone. My husband sat beside me, holding my hand under the table, a quiet reminder that he was here, that I wasn't alone. But he couldn't shield me from the sharp glances, the subtle digs, the tiny but powerful tests Sarah had engineered. And I realized I didn't want to hide behind him. I had to stand my ground, assert my boundaries, and protect myself all night. The group chatted about work, trips, parties, but I could sense layers of testing beneath the conversation. They were assessing my patience, my tolerance, how far I would allow things to go. Sarah wasn't the only one. The entire group, in subtle ways, was testing me, trying to see if I could remain calm, if I could maintain my sense of self and protect my marriage. As the evening ended, Sarah paused briefly near my husband, as if to say something, her eyes flicking toward me with a challenging intensity. She was no longer fragile, no longer tearful. She had returned fully as the sharp, cunning version of herself, asserting her presence and her power. Back at home, we sat in silence. I asked, quietly but pointedly, "Do you think she really wants to reconcile, or is this all a test?" He sighed, looking down. "Both. She wants the friendship restored, but she also wants to see how you react. And it's not just her. The whole group is watching, seeing where the lines are drawn." I felt fatigue seep into my bones, but alongside it, determination. I couldn't allow any one friend, ex-friend, or even my husband's long-term confidant to test my place in our marriage. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for our shared life. I had to learn to control my emotions, to stand firm, and to strategize for the next encounters. That night, as the warm glow of the lamps fell across our living room, I lay in bed, staring at the shadows, telling myself this wasn't over. Sarah was still out there, observing, calculating, preparing. I realized my strength had to come not just from determination, but from patience, self-control, and the ability to fight quietly and smartly. I understood clearly our marriage, just begun, was already facing a subtle, drawn-out, and exhausting challenge. Sarah remained a shadow in our lives, and I had to stand firm, assert my place, and not let myself be undermined. This was the moment I realized that the real battle had only just begun and it wouldn't end soon. The days after that tense gathering with the friend group felt thick and heavy at home, like a dense fog pressing down on everything. I felt as if I were living in a world where even the smallest detail could trigger anxiety. My heart would race with every phone, vibration, or message from the group, especially if it was from Sarah. I knew she hadn't really stepped back. She was still observing, calculating, and exerting influence through her subtle presence in every conversation, every glance. I no longer felt safe or at ease in my own home. One Wednesday evening, while I was preparing dinner, my husband came in with a tense expression. He told me Sarah had called and wanted to meet him for a serious talk. My chest tightened instantly. I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. This would be a careful, subtle test where every word, every glance, and every gesture could affect my emotions and boundaries. That night, he left to meet her, leaving me alone in the living room, the warm yellow light spilling across the floor, while a mix of anxiety and helplessness settled over me. I wondered what she would say. Did she truly want to reconcile, or was she testing me, measuring whether I had the strength to stand my ground? Those questions circled endlessly in my mind, making it impossible to focus on anything else. All I could do was sit quietly, breathe deeply, and mentally prepare for the subtle battle ahead. The next day, my husband returned, looking drained, his eyes heavy with fatigue. He explained that Sarah had arrived, carrying that fragile, careful smile, speaking softly but with undeniable authority. She recounted old memories between her and him, emphasizing that the friendship still mattered to her. He tried to explain that we were now married, that boundaries had to shift, but Sarah was unwilling to accept this easily. Every word, every glance felt like a test, gauging my reaction even from a distance. I felt anger rising within me, but at the same time I understood the sophistication of her strategy. Sarah didn't need to yell or create drama, simply by reminding him and everyone around their past connection. She applied pressure, forcing me to constantly monitor my emotions and maintain my stance. I realized that if I wanted to protect my marriage, I had to remain calm, stand firm, and develop a strategy for future encounters. That evening, sitting beside my husband on the sofa, I asked in a low but firm voice, "Do you think she's testing me? Not just you, but me too." He sighed and looked at me with a tired, serious gaze. "I think so. She wants to see how we react. And it's not only her, the whole group is watching. They want to see if we can maintain boundaries, protect each other, and stand strong against subtle challenges." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, forcing myself to calm the storm of anger and anxiety inside. I understood that I had to be strong, not just for him, but for myself. I couldn't let anyone, old friends or long-time confidants, undermine my place in our marriage. I had to control my emotions, stand firm, and plan for the next encounters. Sarah's image lingered in my mind, sharp, strategic, quietly powerful, and calculating. She was like a shadow, present in every moment of our lives, testing boundaries and provoking unease. I knew the next meeting would be even more challenging, and I needed to prepare mentally, emotionally, and strategically so I wouldn't be pulled into her subtle manipulations. That night, lying in bed with the soft glow of the lamp spilling through the window, I realized one thing clearly. This battle wasn't going to end anytime soon. It wasn't just about Sarah or the friend group. It was about protecting our marriage, maintaining peace in our relationship, and standing firm against subtle, persistent challenges. I closed my eyes and reminded myself I had to be strong, patient, and smarter than any scheme Sarah or the group might conjure. True strength comes not only from determination, but from the ability to fight quietly, with control and unwavering self-belief. A week had passed since my husband's secret meeting with Sarah, and the tension at home hadn't lifted. Each morning, as the first light of day filtered through the blinds, I still felt the weight pressing down on my shoulders. Sarah hadn't stepped back, I knew that much, and the rest of the friend group remained quietly observant, measuring every reaction, every glance, every word. I reminded myself to stay calm, to maintain composure, but at times a sense of helplessness bubbled up, making me want to scream. On Wednesday evening, my husband and I decided to join the group for dinner. I sat quietly, scanning every detail, the arrangement of seats, the angles of their eyes, the subtle body language. Sarah arrived last, gliding into the room with the ease of someone completely in control, as if nothing had happened. She smiled, but in her eyes lingered that quiet, calculated power. I realized instantly that this was her test, not with words, but with presence, with a deliberate, challenging glance at my husband. My stomach tightened. Throughout the dinner, Sarah recounted old stories with my husband, emphasizing how important she still considered their relationship. She didn't make eye contact with me directly, but the message was clear. You were not the priority here. Every laugh, every anecdote, every playful memory she shared felt like a test of my composure, of my emotional strength. I forced polite smiles and nods, maintaining calm outwardly, while inside, I felt as though I were on a tightrope stretched over a chasm. I understood, then, that this wasn't just about Sarah. It was about my mental and emotional strength, my ability to stand my ground and to protect my marriage from subtle yet persistent intrusions. Every so often, my husband would squeeze my hand under the table, a quiet yet steady gesture of reassurance. He wanted me to know he was present, that I was not alone, but he couldn't shield me from each glance, each carefully framed story, each subtle test that Sarah had engineered. I realized that I couldn't rely entirely on him. I had to hold my own ground, to assert my boundaries with deliberate calm and strategic thought. As dinner wound down, Sarah lingered near my husband briefly. Her eyes flicked over me with a silent challenge, a subtle assertion of power, before she gracefully excused herself. She no longer looked fragile, no longer teary. She had returned as the calculated, quietly commanding figure she had always been, silently signaling that the conflict wasn't over. A part of me flared with anger, but another part of me acknowledged that I needed to respond not impulsively, but with patience, observation, and strategic timing. Back at home, we sat together in the living room. I looked at him, voice steady but firm. "Do you think she's trying to test me? Not just you, but me too." He exhaled slowly, eyes heavy with thought. "I do. She wants to see how we respond. And it's not just her, the whole group is watching. They want to see if we can hold our ground, protect each other, and maintain boundaries without cracking under pressure." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. I knew then that I had to be strong, not just for him, but for myself. This battle wasn't simply about Sarah or the friend group. It was about defending our marriage, preserving peace in our relationship, and standing firm in the face of subtle, persistent challenges. I reminded myself, I must be patient, strategic, and stronger than any schemes Sarah or the others might conceive. True strength does not come solely from determination. It comes from the ability to fight quietly, with composure and unwavering faith in oneself. That night, lying in bed with the soft glow of the lamp spilling across the room, I felt a clarity I hadn't had before. This confrontation, this tension would not resolve quickly or easily. But I also knew that I could survive it, navigate it, and emerge with the integrity of my marriage intact if I could remain calm, vigilant, and deliberate in every interaction. Sarah could try her games, the group could watch and judge, but I would remain steady, strategic, and unshaken. And that was my power. The week following my husband's tense meeting with Sarah passed with the same heavy, suffocating feeling at home. Every corner of the house, every object, every ray of sunlight seemed to carry an invisible weight from her and the rest of the friend group. I constantly reminded myself to control my emotions, but the tension bubbled up so strongly at times that it was hard to breathe. Every time my husband received a text or call from the group, my chest tightened. I knew those messages could be nothing more than another subtle test Sarah had designed, a way to see how I would respond, to measure my limits. That Friday evening, we were invited to a barbecue at Julia's house. I knew Sarah would be there, but avoiding her wasn't an option. It was part of the social circle we had been involved with long before our marriage. As we stepped into the yard, I immediately sensed the atmosphere split into two currents. The group chatted and laughed, but every so often their eyes flicked toward my husband and me, quietly evaluating how we reacted. And then Sarah appeared, entering gracefully last, with that familiar, soft smile. But her eyes were sharp, observant, and piercing, scanning every detail of our movements and expressions. Throughout the evening, she recounted old stories with my husband, trips they had taken, shared secrets I had never known, anecdotes that reminded everyone how deeply connected they had been. She emphasized that she had always been there for him in ways I couldn't fully understand. I had to consciously restrain the surge of jealousy and anger to keep my composure in the face of her subtle digs, her challenging glances, and her implied messages. Each story she told, each gesture, each laugh was carefully calculated. A subtle test to make me realize that in her eyes and in the eyes of the group, my place was not yet fully secure. I noticed my husband frequently squeezing my hand under the table, a silent yet steady reassurance that he was present, that I wasn't alone. But he couldn't shield me from each measured glance, each carefully framed memory, each tactical remark Sarah tossed into the air like a challenge. I realized that I could no longer rely solely on him. I had to hold my own ground, assert my boundaries firmly, and protect our marriage with a combination of reason, patience, and strategy. As the evening wound down, Sarah paused near my husband, her eyes flicking toward me with that unmistakable, quiet challenge before she finally stepped away. She was no longer the fragile, tearful woman she had once appeared to be. She had returned as the same sophisticated, subtly commanding, and strategic presence she had always been, a living reminder that this battle was far from over. A wave of anger surged through me, but alongside it came clarity. I needed to choose the right moments to respond, to observe carefully, and to act with measured patience. When we returned home, we sat together in the living room, the soft lighting highlighting the tension that still lingered. I turned to him, voice calm but firm. "Do you see it? She's not just testing you, she's testing me too. They want to see how we react, how we handle it." He exhaled slowly, eyes thoughtful. "I know, and it's not just her, the whole group is watching. They want to see if we can maintain our boundaries, protect each other, and remain unshaken under pressure." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. I understood then that I had to be strong, not just for him, but for myself. This battle was no longer simply about Sarah or the group. It was about defending the integrity of our marriage, preserving peace in our relationship, and standing firm against subtle, persistent challenges. I reminded myself, I must be patient, strategic, and stronger than any scheme Sarah or the others might attempt. True strength comes not only from sheer determination, comes from the ability to fight quietly, with composure and with unwavering faith in oneself. That night, lying in bed with the soft glow of the lamp casting warm light across the room, I realized with a sharp clarity, this confrontation, this unspoken tension, would not resolve quickly or easily. Sarah could continue her games, the friend group could continue to judge and evaluate, but I would remain vigilant, deliberate, and unshaken. I would navigate each encounter strategically, holding my ground, protecting my marriage, and asserting the boundaries that no subtle manipulation could breach. That was the power I needed to claim, and I was determined to do so. The following weekend, we were invited to a small gathering hosted by the friend group, and I knew without a doubt that Sarah would be there. A quiet tension lingered in my chest, but alongside it was a newfound sense of determination. Over the past weeks, I had learned how to control my emotions, how to observe and assess each situation before reacting. I realized that this battle was not about raising my voice or showing anger. It was about maintaining boundaries, protecting my marriage, and asserting myself with patience, strategy, and quiet strength. As we stepped into the room, I immediately felt the atmosphere thicken. Every glance, every smile, every subtle movement carried a weight, a silent test. Sarah arrived last, as always, entering with a confident, controlled presence. Her smile was soft, almost casual, but her eyes were sharp, cold, and unyielding, measuring every detail of our actions. Though she said nothing directly to me, her message was unmistakable. You are not the center. You have never truly been the priority. My pulse quickened. An anger rose in me, but I drew a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm, to not show any weakness. Throughout the evening, Sarah continued to recount old memories with my husband, trips, inside jokes. Moments only the two of them shared, highlighting how deeply she understood him in ways I could not. She positioned herself as an inseparable part of his past, subtly testing whether I could remain composed under pressure. I listened carefully, spoke only when necessary, and maintained a polite, neutral demeanor. Every glance, every laugh, every recollection from her was a silent game, and I had to play it with strategy and patience. My husband constantly held my hand under the table, a quiet gesture of support and reassurance. I felt his presence and protection, yet I knew he could not shield me from every glance, every subtle comment, every psychological challenge Sarah had meticulously planned. I realized that I had to stand firm myself, to assert my boundaries calmly, and to safeguard our marriage through both reason and emotional control. True power, I understood now, was not loud or confrontationally, was silent, patient, strategic, and resilient as the night progressed. Sarah lingered near my husband, her eyes sweeping over me with an unspoken challenge before she finally excused herself. She was no longer the fragile, tearful woman I had once seen. She had returned as a refined, subtly commanding, and calculating presence. She reminded me that this battle was ongoing, but now I felt different. I was prepared. I had developed patience, observation skills, and a strategy for responding thoughtfully rather than reactively later. At home, we sat together on the sofa, the quiet hum of the evening surrounding us. I looked at my husband, voice calm but unwavering. Do you see it? This isn't just about Sarah. This is about us and how we stand together. He squeezed my hand, his eyes steady and resolute. I know, and we've stood strong. No one can shake us as long as we remain united, trusting each other and protecting one another. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, grounding breath. A new strength surged through me. I realized that Sarah and the group could try to challenge us. They could observe and judge, but no one could breach the boundaries that we had established together. This was not a battle about control or confrontation. It was about preserving the values of our marriage, protecting our peace, and learning to be strong in a calm, intelligent, and deliberate way over the following hours. I reflected on the many subtle battles we had faced, the hidden tests, the challenging glances, the careful manipulation, and the pressure from the friend group. Each moment had taught me something valuable, not just about Sarah, but about myself, my resilience, and the power of our partnership. I realized that every trial was an opportunity to fortify our bond, to assert our place in each other's lives, and to cultivate unwavering trust and respect, by the end of the night. As we returned home and finally sank into the familiar comfort of our living room, I felt an immense sense of relief and empowerment. Each challenge Sarah had thrown at us, each test of patience, had become a lesson in strength, strategy, and emotional intelligence. I understood now that the battle might continue, but we were ready to face any subtle games, any quiet provocations, any lingering doubts from the outside. Together, we were unshakable, resilient, and stronger than ever before. Lying in bed, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the room, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. This wasn't about defeating Sarah in a dramatic showdown. It was about mastering patience, strategy, and emotional control. It was about standing firm in the face of subtle challenges, protecting love and trust, and walking forward as a united, unstoppable force. The battle was far from over, but now I was ready and so were we.